been a little bit hectic lately. If I'm being honest, I've been going through some craziness in my own life and sorting things out, and it has certainly made it a little more difficult to get down to the spot to stream. But I assure you folks that I am not going away anytime soon, and that I'm going to stick to it. And with that, I think it's incredibly important that I spend some time with today's guest, Nikki Fordey, who, in my opinion, is going to be a very formidable voice, presence within the progressive left in New Hampshire for the foreseeable future. And and part of the reason I say this is because observably, Nikki's on top of like literally everything in every community, and it's just like it's pretty bonkers. She's all over it, and not only that, but has a very, very good take on just about everything that I've seen her have an opinion on. So, without any further ado, here's Nikki Fordey, folks. Welcome, Nikki. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thanks.
Good.
What an introduction.
Hey, I mean, you know, it's I try to do it up. You know, like when Sherry was here, you know, I love referring to Sherry as a Twitter legend purely because of like the utter mess that managed to get caused in the State House over one little tweet that she let out. So like, yeah, anytime, you know, it's like I want people to get to know the folks that come on this show as people and to have a very human understanding of them. And it's also important to just lift up your fellow comrades, you know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes I forget, like, you only see the world through your own eyes and your own experience. So to me, it's like perfectly normal to be super detail oriented and like, I'm looking up this, I'm looking up that, I got this feed, I'm on this. Like, to me, that's just like standard operating procedure. And then when someone's like, how do you know all of this? I'm like, oh yeah, that is, all right, cool.
I just, you know, do my thing, like just kind of on it. But yeah, no, and that's the thing, is that people like you who are out here staying on top of that stuff really help keep things going. Because when I think about the amount of folks that are like quote unquote activists TM, you know what I mean? Like they a lot of times just kind of want to get the emails and and like, and having people that genuinely do keep up with every single little bit of it, really, like that type of personality, that type of player really keeps the ball moving. So it's just, you know, I commend you for that, like big time. That's huge. So keep doing it. Yeah, keep rewarding your detail orientation. You know, I'm giving you an introduction, but like I want to give you a moment to introduce yourself, because I feel like there are so many key things about everybody that folks just don't necessarily know, and it's not always accompanied in like an about me on a web page. You know what I mean? And I think that I'm just like, you know, like I see you really standing up for people that are really in need and fighting for those that are most seriously in need in this state. And I just like, tell me about your causes. Tell me about what matters to you.
I mean, I think I've always been someone who really wanted a purpose. Like, I'll get dark for just a second, just to kind of give you a little bit of framework. Mm-hmm. I have had some like really traumatic experiences in my life. I've been diagnosed with PTSD and anxiety disorder, and kind of some of my work in working through that and working on my symptoms and like coming back to life, so to speak, is what led me to become a social worker, become a drug and alcohol counselor. And then those experiences have led me to, you know, seek public policy work. But I had a terrible, terrible experience when I was very young. I was 12, and I I was assaulted and almost murdered, basically. And kind of from that point, like I always had this thing in my head was like, why didn't I die? Like, why am I still here? And that's a heavy question.
Mm.
Like, why am I here? Why am I taking up space? And I think when I found social work, when I found that I could use some of my deepest, darkest stuff, and it helped other people, where I made an actual measurable difference in someone else's life,
Mm.
that just fueled the fire. It was like, I am meant to be here. Like any thoughts of past, maybe passive suicidality, or questioning, what is worth this? Why am I suffering? When I'm able to channel that and help other people, all of that goes away.
Mhm.
And so I really feel like I've had a natural progression in my personal and professional pursuits, where it's been, I have a voice, I'm not shutting up, and I'm going to put it out there. I'm here, I'm alive, and every second that I'm alive is a gift.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, so first off, I mean, thank you for being willing to share that story in such a like a
Mhm.
public space, because I know the courage that it takes to just have to confront that kind of thing on the regular, or in spaces with people. And I, like I hear that and I think about how I really myself try to look at what I've been through in those same ways. I have not experienced anything like what you've experienced. My own experiences definitely tell me though that like every one of those things is fuel to, as you've said, continue to fight. And like I, on a on a in a more philosophical manner for a moment, like I think um I don't get too wrapped up in religion myself, but I think that there's something to be said for that like spiritual experience of helping others and making a difference in somebody else's life. You know what I mean? Like
It's the self-actualization. If we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like, to me, that's how I get that top piece of my pyramid. Like, if I've got, the safety, the security, the belonging, all of that good foundation,
mhm.
that extra piece on there, that is, this is why I'm here,
Right.
being able to help others. Now, granted, any strength can be taken to an extreme and become an issue.
Of course. Of course.
You have, like, those buzzwords of self-care and boundaries. I mean, that actually means something. You have to be on top of that. And there's definitely been points in my life where I have gone too far, where I'm always, on concentrating on other people, and you got to have something left for yourself as well.
Yes. Definitely. Definitely. And I think, like it's also one thing you know, bringing up this stuff reminds me of I was looking into this guy, psychologist, Stanislav Grof,
Hmm.
who he did a bunch of research on trauma with psychedelics, and then later with just like not without any type of additional chemical aid, just like a powerful suggestive non-medical procedure that would induce this kind of a state. And so and he did a lot of discussing about he would propose hylogogic versus hologogic states of being, where two sort of simultaneous states, one being your sort of ephemeral soul existence and your other being your material body existence, and the conflicts that occur between them. And he did a lot of discussion about the concept of ego death, and I
Mhm.
think like this is, you know religion grapples with this. And I think like honestly, maybe I don't know if it works this way for everybody. I deeply deep I deep down I want to believe. Let me say deep 7 times here. That everybody is gratified by that, by the act of helping somebody else. I don't care, with the exception of maybe psychopaths or sociopaths, people that are clinically unable to, like, their mind literally does not supply the necessary chemicals or neural pathways to adequately provide those type of emotions. But those are few and far between enough that I genuinely believe that people have this capacity to, as you said, get that top piece of their pyramid by hooking it back up to the bottom, essentially, and being like, all right, like, where's the, if, like, the the top of my pyramid comes from the creation of other foundations, in a sense, like, and that's like, that is, in a sense, like, it reminds me of the concepts of, like, of ego death within this high-low hologogic state of being, where you're like, that self-actualization in a more holistic sense is, we're getting really deep right now. This is not how I expected the first question to go, but
Connected though to that sense of how we're all, none of us exist in isolation,
right,
and how the interplay between people, between groups. I think it's important though, being a social worker, I'm very proud of that identity.
right,
It was a long, weird, windy road how I got there. And I don't know necessarily that everyone understands exactly what a social worker is.
yeah, yeah,
It's a very varied role. There's so many different things that you can do with a bachelor's or a master's in social work.
mm-hmm.
But at the same time, social work does have its history and its roots in a really racist, classist, like, white women going into the undesirable parts of town and let's domesticate people.
Right,
It
yeah,
gets not that great.
right,
And I think that those questions are coming up and people are asking that and saying how, what really are social work ethics or social work principles, and how do we deconstruct some of that and make sure that we are truly liberating people, but working with them, not at them, not superior to,
right,
but in line with.
exactly,
Which I would say, because some people are like, well, what's the difference between a social worker and a psychologist or a
mm-hmm.
mental health counselor? And at least in the way that I was trained and how I try to, in my professional life, is that with social work, it really is like, I'm working with you to help you unlock your potential.
Right,
You are the expert in your experience. There's the answer is somewhere in you for a lot of things.
mm-hmm.
And that's a very different way of operating with someone than that's that typical psychiatrist where it's like, I have all the info and I'm going to tell you what's wrong with you. That's not how I
Right,
operate at all.
right,
So to me, that's part of social work is combining my personal experience, my academic qualifications. I'm a nerd.
it's okay,
Love writing, love
you're in
reading.
good company, I tell you.
It's all good, but using that to really, it's a cliche by now, but meet people where they are.
Right, right, totally, yeah,
Let's start there. And a lot of it is comparing themselves to themselves. Like,
mm-hmm.
I don't want you to compare yourself to someone else, to me, to anybody, but like, where have you been? Where are you now? Where do you want to go?
Right, right, exactly, exactly. And something else that strikes me is the as you describe sort of what social work is in your experience, it, there's the like the psychiatrist psychologist type of thing, and something that I'm like been more familiar with is this idea of like supportive therapy, and more specifically the absence of supportive therapy within the practice of psychology. And it sounds like in a lot of cases the social worker sort of picks up that part of the work, like when it comes to saying, okay, like, you've just gone to your psychologist and you've had a therapy session and you've discerned all of these different problems, and like, but what do you do about it materially to resolve your issue? And like, there's a deficit there, and a lot of times the social worker is the person who comes in, will actually help that person who's like, yeah, I know I have all these problems, but I don't necessarily know how to solve them. Like, I can identify they are problems, but I can't see that road of how do I get from A to B. And that, I've in my experience, social work is often about, we're going to show you the roadmap for
Mhm.
you to get to A to B. Like, there's no one road that's going to get you to A to B, and every single time that road changes. Like, nobody's going to be able to follow the exact same path twice. But for you, like, I will be your guide in figuring out what that path is. Would you say that's like a relatively adequate metaphor to describe what's going on there?
mean, it's definitely how I've approached things. There are a lot of different ways that social workers act.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm sorry about that. My pug is upset that
That's
he's not
okay.
getting.
That's okay. He can it that Your pug is allowed to be upset. That's a okay.
I mean, a lot of people, there's different ways that people look at it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so as a licensed independent clinical social worker, I am allowed to diagnose people, which is crazy and weird, and I don't like it, but
Mm-hmm.
insurance requires it.
Sure.
So I can get paid. Um, so often, sometimes it is a secondary sort of role. There are other people that are kind of more deficit based or pointing fingers as like, this is wrong, you need to fix this.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I've always operated from a strengths based perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and like, what are the resources that you have within you, within your environment, your support network, etc. How do we, build both, because it has to be both.
Right.
There are going to be internal things that are barriers to people, but a lot of the times those external barriers, they're not all things that I can knock down.
Yeah.
And that is really what led me to going back to school to get a master's in public policy,
Mm-hmm.
looking into legislation, starting to try to change some of these laws that are bad policies, that are hurting people, that are preventing people from their own self-actualization.
Right.
So I kind of explain it like, over the years, I've probably had thousands of clients at this point,
Mm-hmm.
because I've had different positions. I worked at a methadone clinic for a year and a half and had, hundreds of people. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that like I've had a variety of clinical experiences, but it's like you see the same wounds in people, and it's
Yeah.
like, I'm giving people band-aids, when it's like, how about I find out what's causing these freaking wounds and stop it in the first place.
Right.
I want to be more proactive and not just reactive. And so that's
Right.
kind of how, like, I went from, solely operating kind of on a individual, or I mean, I did some group therapy too, but it was like you see the same walls getting put in front of people, and the phrase that I hate to the end of the earth of like, because I'm always like, well, why do we do it this way, or why is that the law, why is
Mm-hmm.
that the rule? And people would just be like, well, that's just how we've always done it. And I'm like, that's not an explanation.
Right. Yeah.
Not
Exactly.
an
That's bullshit. Yeah. You gotta
So
give it.
I just, time after time, I've come up against things or laws or policies where no one can give me an answer as far as why they are the way they are. I see that they're hurting people, and I go, okay, then we need to change it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One example is, when I moved to New Hampshire several years ago, I had a lot of trouble getting my drug and alcohol counselor license, because there was a requirement that you needed certain supervision things signed off on your original supervisor, and all this stuff that like other states don't have. And
Mm-hmm.
my supervisor wouldn't sign it, because she's like, because it was like, it's a whole big thing. But
Okay.
basically, like, this like technicality
Mm-hmm.
was going to prevent me from being able to help in a state that is just the overdose crisis in this state is out of control, and we
Yeah.
could have a whole like 6-hour podcast on that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
But,
totally.
like, so a little technicality, they were like, well, you're going to have to start over. Like they were, because it's like 5,000 hours of, like, there's a lot of hours
What?
and stuff. And they're like, well, if your supervisor won't sign this piece of paper, there's nothing we can do. It's the law. And so I said, we have to change the law.
Yeah.
And I took the attorney general in New Hampshire, and he agreed with me. And I was the first person in New Hampshire to get my MLADAC without having this stupid piece of paper signed. And so
Yes.
now it's because I challenged it and I didn't accept what they were telling me. Now people from other states have a better, easier path while still being very qualified,
Right.
but they don't have this stupid technicality that's preventing them from being able to come to this state and help granite staters that need treatment and support.
Exactly. And that's an amazing detail right there that I like. So because when I think about it, it's like, okay, I I I'm gonna skip around a little bit because I think this is sort of a great time to sort of get into this topic. When I mean, we obviously have a huge shortage of social work, providers that can really do the meaningful things that we need here. And what you just described is overcoming what had been traditionally a huge obstacle towards actually increasing that number. So there's the point of like, yeah, legislatively, this makes absolutely no sense to do this kind of thing. And it also means that we as a public have less of a good idea of what social workers can actually do because we're reducing the number of them available to us, right? So if you like, I'm always interested by this idea of like replace the police with social workers, right? Now, also this episode generally is framed within the context of like existing within a misinformation society. And so there's sort of two sides to this, right? One, there's the conservative misunderstanding of what a social worker even is or does, right? And like when a conservative person hears social worker, probably one of the first things that pops into their head is like somebody that the government is like they probably think of like a DHS, right? Like someone who's like child services, right? Like they're thinking like
Ultimately, yeah, when I told my family I was going to school for social work, they're like, why do you want to take other people's children away?
right,
And I was, no.
right,
But yeah, I do think that is most common. People think of like child welfare work, which
mm-hmm,
is very important work, and
right,
I'm not counting that, but that is such a small sliver of social work. I think part of the issue also is that not every state has title protection.
mm-hmm,
So people can call themselves social workers without having a social work degree or a social work license, which is
right.
a huge issue.
Yeah,
But
that's
yeah,
not good.
there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what a social worker is,
Yep.
and some of that is on us. Some of that is on, I'm a dutiful dues-paying member of the National Association of Social Workers, but I believe there is more that can be done at the federal level and each state, to give that information to accurately portray the field.
Right. So there's so that's one side of it, right? That we have this concern that like with the conservative example of like the immediate why do you want to take kids away problem, right? Like that's one iteration of it. My
Right, the state interfering with
right.
personal, yeah.
Right. So there's the opposition to we want social workers to replace the police on that side of it. On the flip side of it, right? I have to ask, if we have such a deficit in understanding what social work even is, how reasonable is it for so many leftists to just simply cry, we should replace police with social workers? Like, what, like, when you,
It's incredibly reductive, and it's not looking at multiple facets of the situation. I think there is a kernel of truth there that we have many situations where someone who is trained in mental health and substance use disorder would be the better first responder.
mm-hmm,
At the same time, though, I don't think it's social work has a very complicated history where it is just enforcing law enforcement control the state. I mean, if we just look at child welfare, who makes the determination of what a fit home is?
Right. Yeah,
That can
exactly.
be inherently racist and classist, and who where the standards are set. So I think that it it's a nice little cry, right? Like,
Hmm.
let's more social workers, less police. We want to bring in people who understand mental health and substance use. And I think that's a good idea, but
Hmm.
it's not fully fleshed out.
Right.
I think social work and different mental health professions need to take a look at themselves as well. And, they have to reckon with how they've created and upheld and strengthened oppressive systems themselves. There are a lot of social workers who are very much against this cry,
Hmm.
who are saying we don't want to be working with the police or in place of them. That our mission is very separate.
Right.
All sorts of ethical dilemmas are created when social workers have things like like if I had a client that was on probation or parole, depending on the um, depending on the contract or whatever that they sign, to me, I work for my client. I don't
Mhm.
work for anybody else.
Right. Yeah.
Um, if my client doesn't sign, protecting their every, if we release any information, they have to sign off on that and be very clear about what information I can release. I'm very, very, like, confidentiality is so important. If I don't have that with my client, what the heck am I doing there?
Hmm.
Right. I need to have something to build that trust and that therapeutic rapport. So when there are situations where maybe someone's on probation or parole, or they're involved with DCYF with their children, if they are coerced into signing something, or that I then become an extension of that body, that
Hmm.
the probation, parole, whatever, where I just tattletale on them, that's not my role. That's not why I signed up for this. And I think ethically, my number one responsibility is to my client. Now, obviously, there are very limited exceptions, imminent harm to self, imminent harm to someone else, very narrow exceptions to the confidentiality.
Hmm.
And I absolutely stick to that. But it gets very complicated when you start to say that social workers should replace police, because I don't think social workers are there to enforce laws. I don't think
Yeah.
that's,
Well,
so it sounds pretty, but I think it's way more complex than that.
well, and
Um,
what I think, so just to sort of hop onto that point right there, just to add a little bit, is that, like, if you don't understand what it takes to get us to a world where we are able to abolish the police, right? If you're sitting here today and you're saying, well, abolish the police, and you don't have a solution for what that world looks like, and then you're saying, well, we should replace police with social workers because that's your closest analog to something that's positive, right? You have to, you, not you, but the royal you, the viewer who is making this statement, at that moment, it is imperative that you then accept the fact that you have just decided to put your faith 110% in the hands of social workers writ large to decide the timetable and the manner in which we get to a world that does not have police in it, right? If you're going to put the onus on them, then when they come back and they tell you, well, it's at this rate, it's going to take us 75 years to change public's opinion, like, this is how many election cycles it would require for us to actually shift it if we were to, like, we have different projection models, and then you get into a whole subset of, like, now there's all these separate data analysts that need to do social, like, assessments of social work, and, like, you are asking for a mountain to move when you do that, like.
right. And that's why I think, you know, um, so I'm closest to Litchfield is kind of like in between Manchester and Nashua.
Hmm.
Sometimes we get grouped in as Greater Manchester, sometimes not. But so I'm more familiar with Manchester. And what I will say, it is not perfect, but in New Hampshire, the way that they deal with community mental health is that it's broken up into 10 community systems.
Hmm.
Like each community mental health center has a catchment area. So the Manchester, uh, the mental health center of Greater Manchester, they have a mobile crisis team. So 24/7, anyone in their catchment area can call and say, hey, I'm with someone, they're having a crisis, or someone can call and say, I don't feel safe, or I need to talk to someone, etc. And I feel that that model where someone who is trained in mental health goes out,
Hmm.
they're not calling 911, right? And the
Right.
police are showing up, but they're calling and and sometimes agreeing to be evaluated for hospitalization, if
Hmm.
there's a concern about their safety or something like that. But that people have a source where they can connect with a mental health professional who can then evaluate using evidence-based tools as to, is this person a threat to themselves, someone else? Is this just someone that
Right.
needs to be connected to maybe some emergency services? Is there a resource barrier? Are they homeless? Are they, whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
But like, I think it's not a perfect model, but I think that that comes a lot closer to what people are talking about when they think about having something in place of that, like having an emergency line where there's something that's not quite right,
Hmm.
or if you see someone and um, unfortunately there have been some awful cases, nationally, where we see someone will call the police because they think someone, needs help, and then that person ends up, being hurt or even killed by the police when it's a
Right.
mental health episode, or it's something having to do with substance use, either intoxication or withdrawal, where there really isn't a threat, but then things get misinterpreted. People don't really understand what's going on. So I think that there are people who are working on interventions
Hmm.
to try to bring a better understanding of mental health and what that looks like. I mean, what I will say in defense a little bit of my profession, I see some of those memes that are like, oh, well, you have this guy and he's doing all this crazy stuff and you're just going to call some social workers to come in. I will tell you that when particularly inpatient, I
Hmm.
saw some crazy stuff go down. And, I'm 5 feet tall. I'm not that like kung fu or anything, but one or two of me, we know how to de-escalate to a certain extent,
Right.
right? Like we
Right.
do have ways that we're able to um you know assess a situation and realize this isn't someone that's trying to do harm. This is someone that is either maybe hallucinating, maybe going through a depressive episode, maybe X, Y, and Z, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to sit on the fence and be like, well, we're awesome, but we also suck. It's
Well,
both,
no,
though.
yeah,
It
it's
really
well,
is.
and that's the thing is like so, and that's that right there is I'm glad that you bring this up because this is something that I really like. I could hit on this until the cows come home. That like we on the left, broadly speaking, like especially the ones off the center, right? It's important to understand that there is a significant difference from sitting on the fence or being in the center and holding two truths at the same time,
Yes.
right? Like being like I have watched very very well credentialed people with very very reasoned like left critiques or assessments or positions. Like I have seen them make what I think is an incredibly like reasonable assessment of something. It's like it's the best the left can do given the political space that they're in, and like, and you just like there's a certain amount of like you're gonna guy you gotta take what you can get like at any given moment. You always fight for more than what you can get, but all like you know what I mean. And I will see people just like it's like like I don't know why my head always just I haven't seen the Avengers movie. I haven't watched them, but I know that there's like the whole like the Thanos did nothing wrong people,
Mm,
and it's like with essentially like as Tim Pool would love to argue, like the deontological argument of like, well, you just do it because it's the right thing, man. And um look, like, I don't care if you believe that like it's communism or bust. Like, I don't care if you're a diehard Stalinist. Like, Stalin blew it,
mhm.
like, real bad, and he was really horrible. And that's like, to attack somebody for what would be characterized as like fence sitting, when that person who's the credentialed leftist who's being attacked from their left, right? Like, this is like, I can think of people that I'd describe them as a socialist, and they're being attacked by a communist by not being far left enough. And like and it's like, okay, well, like, yeah, but who's the fence sitter right now? Really, though? Like, and that's sort of like, I just, depending on wherever folks fall into that space, it's important to like, the only reason I hit on this is because it's very important to understand that difference between like, well, I want to compromise and I need to hold both of these things that make me feel uncomfortable at the same time. Or I need to hold this thing that I really love and that I really hate about this one thing simultaneously. It's
Right. And that's kind of how I feel about, you know, I don't think it's something where you have to pick, oh, I want to abolish the police, or the police are wonderful 100% of the time,
right.
amazing. I have police members in my family.
Mm-hmm.
My stepbrother was a police officer in New York, and now he's a firearms trainer
Mm-hmm.
in New York City. I have my other brother is a EMT and a volunteer firefighter. I mean,
Yeah.
I come, it's personal to me. At the same time, systemic racism is real, like,
Right.
full stop. Okay.
Right.
Like, implicit bias is real.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it, yeah,
And this
it's
is
tough.
coming from somebody who would know too. Like, this is coming from somebody who literally watches people experience this stuff on the regular as a
Yeah,
social worker.
absolutely. The way that we frame the world and our split second judgments that we're not even aware of, you know, it's tough, right? So like, my race in Litchfield is typically seen as a pretty red or conservative town, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also changing a lot. We're growing a lot. And part of the reason, I decided to run for office was because I didn't feel that the representatives that we currently have are representing a big portion of the town and what our values are and what's important to us. And, I was like, why am I just sitting around waiting for someone else to run to represent me? Why don't I do this myself? And it's been a wild ride. But I think that we need to have more voices. We need to have a variety of opinions, and to be able to say it's not either or. The truth maybe is somewhere in the middle, and also to not be afraid of either like appearing to contradict yourself. We're all full of contradictions. There are times and circumstances where one thing is true and then a different thing is true. um I in Litchfield right now, it's a big thing that our police station is too small.
Mm-hmm.
Our police officers are eating lunch, cleaning firearms, and processing evidence on the same damn table, and to me that's a complete outrage.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I took a tour of our police station and I was appalled, honestly. We've completely outgrown that station.
Mm-hmm.
There's no space. Um, they're doing the absolute best they can with very, very little,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, at the same time, I can say that nationally, the amount of money that we budget for police is outrageous, and the
Right.
militarization of the police is outrageous, right?
Right.
both of those things are true. I can
Mm-hmm.
support police officers and that there is a specific role that they have in society. I'm not an abolitionist of the police, right? At
Mm-hmm.
least not at this time. We all evolve.
Right.
Um, but at the
We're all on
same
a
time,
continuum.
there are issues, there are deficiencies, there are things where, so I'm also on the budget committee for Litchfield.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll make a plug though, if people are wondering, to run for office, run for something, local politics, like if you've got a select board, town council, budget committee, school board, heck, recreation, whatever it is, that stuff is actually all really important too, and
Yes.
actually does a heck of a lot more in certain areas that affect your day-to-day life than even state rep or senator or anything above that.
Absolutely. And just one little thing to throw on that too is that, like, okay, in the specific instance of the budget committee, right? If you get on the budget committee, you'll be able to in detail understand exactly what's going on with literally everything. Like every department, like, okay, if you're on your zoning board of adjustment or your planning board or whatever, right? Like those are great positions to be on because you get an idea of like sort of like what's happening in town. But when there's a distinct difference with a budget committee because then you actually see how much money the town has. You see how much they're spending on different things. If you want to have an idea of how adequate or inadequate government is, go run for a budget committee. Like seriously. And I would actually like there's part of me that wants to say to like anybody that wants to get in politics, like you should do that anyways. Like just because you're going to need to understand that sort of like weird financial bureaucracy regardless, it's useful. It's very useful. Like if you have aspiration, if you're on the left and you're into progressive politics and you have aspirations to run for office, something I would highly encourage is like look at budget committees because that's like the exact like like or like a master planning committee would be another good type of a position
Yeah,
because
like the
it could
capital improvement plan,
right right
planning. Yeah, it can vary a little bit by town, but
yep
yeah, I was really New Hampshire has a lot more opportunities for people to get involved than some other states and how they do things. I think there are a lot of positives and negatives about, over local control.
oh yeah
But
yeah
being on the budget committee, I mean, I know Litchfield. I can say that. I,
right
I know Litchfield more than people that have lived here decades and decades who don't even know half the stuff that goes on.
mm-hmm.
And then also one thing that I do want to put out there, and I don't think a lot of people think about it, probably the most progressive thing about me is that I want to completely overhaul our healthcare system
Mm-hmm.
as a healthcare provider. And then on the flip side, an often healthcare consumer, it's completely broken. It's
right
completely messed up. Everything needs to change. Right. And I know that that's probably my most radical view, right? Oh, I'm radical because I want everyone that needs healthcare to be able to get it.
uh
Oh,
yeah
are you
yeah
scared?
yeah for real
But how that connects to the budget committee is people will often tell me, when they realize like I support sort of like a national health insurance or some
mm-hmm.
radical change, right? They're like, well, I don't want to pay for other people's healthcare. And I'm like, you already do.
yeah
The one of the biggest increases year after year in the local budget are the healthcare premiums for municipal employees, right, on the town budget side.
mm-hmm.
And then on the school budget side, paying the healthcare premiums for teachers and staff, people that any of the staff that's eligible. We have had some years where the healthcare premiums have gone up 12%, right? Like, so year after year after year, and then people are wondering why your taxes go up year after year after year. And when we have no control over that, we have to fund people's healthcare because we have resigned ourselves to a system where you have to work a certain position
Mm-hmm.
to get that coverage,
right
which should not be a thing, first off.
yeah
And I'll send you my paper on it. I wrote a whole huge thing about how that started, why we tied healthcare to employment, and why
yeah
that's ridiculous.
yep
But people don't look at, like, you're already paying, you're paying into this healthcare system.
Hmm.
Even just in the budget committee on the town side, almost a sixth of our town budget is healthcare costs. When we look at fire, police, municipal employees, dispatchers, all of that, it's literally just paying the percentage of the healthcare premiums.
Hmm.
We don't pay all of it. It's a cost
Yeah,
sharing,
it's just a
but
portion.
it's millions of dollars. It's ridiculous. And then they wonder why we can't level fund a budget year to year. And it's like, well, health and dental insurance went up 10%. So
Yeah. And
cost of things go up every year.
what was that about, free market reducing costs again? Like,
So I think it's difficult. The healthcare
yeah.
is very personal to me. It's very, as on the flip side of having to be impaneled with all the different so as a LICSW, you know, when I worked for a community mental health center, every different insurance has their different forms, their different pieces. You've got to do their dance, and then maybe you get
Yeah.
accepted into that network, and then maybe you get accepted to another network. And a lot of social workers that go out on their own end up either just not taking insurance or only taking private insurance.
Hmm.
And then you're
You're setting a bar of entry,
right.
essentially.
It is not easy to be a Medicare provider.
Hmm.
It's something that I feel very strongly about because Medicare is very reductive about who they'll cover.
Yep.
They won't cover like mental health counselors or drug and alcohol counselors. You have to have an LICSW. That's a whole other thing. But all the hoops that you have to jump through, and all the time that the full-time staff that we had, that all they did was work with the insurance companies.
Hmm.
Like the amount of time and hours and money that goes into interfacing with these insurance companies, like imagine if all of that could get freed up, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, and there's the component of like, at what point do you stop vilifying the person who needs the help?
Mhm.
Like, so if
Those, oh, that person over there, I don't like that. Those people, right?
mm-hmm.
And I mean, not to digress, but sure. Uh, in terms of how we see substance use disorder, addiction,
Yeah.
right, and slowly becoming more of a public health issue, less of a criminal justice, if you can afford the lawyer and all of those issues.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only happening because more people were affected. It
Right.
became to the point where you couldn't say it's just those people over there who aren't there, they chose this, they're those people, right? It's it's my daughter, it's my cousin, it's my mom, it's me. And then people started to care. People only started
Yeah.
to care when it was white rich kids in the suburbs starting to die.
Right. Right.
And that's what it took to shift the policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it sucks that that's what it was. I think we should capitalize on that.
Right.
But I think in terms of healthcare, people tend to not want to move until it personally affects them, someone they care about,
Mm-hmm.
right? It shouldn't take that. It shouldn't take a catastrophic diagnosis or an accident, an injury, for someone to support something like paid family medical leave, you
So
know?
so what do you think the road to convincing people of that is, right? Like, I
I think
so
people are scared. I think they're scared to lose what they have.
mhm.
We have grown up in this society where, whatever the state insurance, Medicaid, um, Massachusetts Mass Health, right? We have grown up and been told, okay, yeah, they get some care, but it's less care or it's not as good, right? But we work and we've earned our better health care. And I don't want to lose that. That people feel like the quality and the responsiveness of their healthcare will be diminished because everyone will get it. But to me, healthcare should not be an industry. It should not be a commodity. It should be something where you're a human being. That's it. That's your qualification. And then maybe we can move on to pet pets getting help as well, because I love the animals.
Yeah.
But let's start with people, okay? But you know what I'm saying? Like, it shouldn't be, okay, here's 10,000 hoops you have to jump through, or are you lucky enough to, be a first person relative of someone who has a job that has a decent healthcare,
Right.
and they only have that because they're a big enough company where they can negotiate these group rates.
Right.
It's ridiculous. It's a system, and it's like you're paying all this money in your premiums and your co-pays and deductibles so that the CEOs of these companies can be millionaires.
Right. Right.
I want I want to pay for healthcare. People think like I want free healthcare. I want to pay for healthcare, but I want to pay for people to get healthcare. I don't want to
Yeah.
pay for these people to be millionaires.
Right. Right.
That's not where
Exactly.
I want my premiums to go. It's
Exactly.
not.
Exactly. Well, so there's a couple of things that I think of when I hear you talking about this stuff, right? Like, one, I think about how like the sort of like this weird like fallacy that we've all gotten on somehow, that like competition is the only thing that drives innovation
Yes.
or growth. That's utter nonsense. Collaboration oftentimes is what is a much better driver of innovation or growth. And if you want to apply that concept to healthcare, we would collaborate by creating a government monopoly with tax dollars to eliminate the problem, as opposed to compete over it, which, like, in a competition, you're that's applying a zero sum, like,
Right.
system to something that essentially doesn't need to be zero sum. And that's sort of like the like on its face, I'm like, well, this is just like this is the reason why it's fucking ridiculous. And then more than that, there's the, to the point about you're bringing up about the amount of hoops somebody has to jump through, right? The amount of different, like, you have to tell us every single transaction that happened in this, like every single account that you have for the past 4 months. We need to know your past 4 employers. Like, oh, well, that goes back 15 years. Doesn't matter. You need to tell us about it. So you're like all of a sudden divulging like your entire living and working history for the past 15 years. And you know that they're like, well, like, you have expenses, but we're not going to include every single one of them in the math. And it's like, okay, at what point does this become poor shaming? At what point does this become like class shaming? At what point, like when do we start to think like, you know what, maybe this is really bad for the psyche of the person who's trying to get help right now, or who needs health insurance right now, or like any of these that like the amount, like, what, how is that freedom? Like, that's my question, is like, how dare you say I'm free to choose my health insurance? What I want is the freedom to not have to fill out health insurance paperwork,
Right.
damn it. Like, don't make me do
And it's
that.
an illusion of choice. It's absolutely an illusion. It's not real.
Right.
Um, when people say that, or the argument for, oh, okay, let's have a public option.
Mm-hmm.
It's BS. It will never
Right.
work. And I could send you my paper on that as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
um, it just does not work.
Right.
We have a history in this country where if something is seen as, even our language, how we talk about it, if something is seen as an entitlement or as a specialty one-off program,
Mm-hmm.
it's on the chopping block, right? But something that is seen as a universal, something that, that sense of like having to earn it, just
Well,
makes my skin crawl.
and
Like,
even that word entitlement has baggage, you know what I mean? If like you're gonna say entitlement, it's like, what the hell, dude? Like, why is that the word you're using for it? Like, I mean, I understand why historically, but at the same time, it's like, that's like Reagan did such a good job destroying like the meaning of the word entitlement and making it a bad thing as opposed to a good thing. Like it's like we should feel entitled to have humanity, right? But instead we've I have to wonder how many Americans, when they hear the word entitlement, immediately think of the concept of a welfare queen. And that pisses me off to no end, right? Like that's so
Yeah, it's frustrating. There's a lot of caricatures and stereotypes might be
mm-hmm,
a better word. And I'll admit, I think I grew up, I first 18 years of my life I was on Long Island, New York, which
mm-hmm.
has its own issues. And I was a little bit of a troublemaker there too.
Hey, aren't we
Different,
all when we're kids, right?
you
Like,
know, yeah, pushing that envelope as a
gotta do it.
teenager. Um,
Gotta do it.
but I grew up and my mom and my stepfather really did instill in me that, like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Everyone has an opportunity, like, you just work hard enough and then you'll get it, and you've earned everything that you've gotten. And it took a long time for me to like deconstruct some of that, because I am someone who, you give me a task, like I'm going to do it, and
Mm-hmm,
like, and then some.
mm-hmm,
I do try to earn things,
mm-hmm,
and put my work, my work ethic, and put my whole heart into it, right? But realizing that that can be true as well as I have white privilege.
mm-hmm,
That I have certain things and certain doors have been open to me, um, at the same time as I am dedicated and have work ethic and all that stuff.
mm-hmm.
So it's been a lot, and it's a continuing process,
Yep.
to unpack that and realize, in what situations I have a one up that I haven't earned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So, okay, while we're on the topic of healthcare, right? I like something that I kind of want to like. It touches me personally in my life, and I know that this affects you as well. Like experiencing or knowing someone who experiences disability, and um, more specifically, like you've express you suffer from a connective tissue disorder, and something that I want to sort of like, I know this is not political at all. As a side note, connective tissue disorders don't present like much. You will not, like, in visually speaking, you will not be able to walk up to somebody on the street and be able to discern whether or not that person has a connective tissue disorder immediately. Like, there are certain other traits that are accompanied with certain connective tissue disorders. Like in the instance of something like Marfan's, there's very
Mhm.
specific like body characteristics that are like often occur in people that suffer from that particular condition. But the point being is that you can't see it, and this sort of gets at what often gets described in mental illness as like invisible conditions or things that you can't see. And that actually, the relationship between those two things is something that I want to address as a side point, because like I often have found that people who experience this type of invisible condition get misdiagnosed in psychiatric spaces rather than having their physical experience be addressed, because there's a lack of literacy within the medical community on connective tissue disorders. But beyond that,
I
yeah.
since I can remember as far back as 9, 10 years old, being in pain
Mm-hmm,
and being told it's growing pains, it's this, it's that, and
mm-hmm,
then, oh, you're just depressed, you're just anxious, you're just overly sensitive, you're just
yep,
sensitive. And I extreme chronic pain that, would prevent me from doing many of the things that I wanted to do, and having multiple surgeries over the years, and no one being able to tell me why all of these things were wrong with my body,
mm-hmm,
and feeling shamed, when I would go to doctors and they would say, well, the tests are coming back normal, so you're fine. And I'd be like, I'm in excruciating pain, I'm not
right,
fine. Like, or, I dislocate things just, doing normal stuff,
yeah,
or,
yeah,
so I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, the hypermobile type.
mm-hmm,
And so my joints and things everything's like really stretched out.
yep,
So it means that, yeah, you're like flexible, like party tricks. But
right,
unfortunately, it also means that you're really susceptible to injury.
yep,
And then once you injure something, you're really susceptible to re-injure it over and
mm-hmm,
over again. And I was told, you just need to be more mindful when you're moving. Like, you're just accident prone. You're just this, you're just,
right,
just. I mean, I only got my diagnosis about less than 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm 33 years old. So
Right.
this has been since I was, single digits,
Mm-hmm.
going through and having all of this pain and different things associated with it.
Yep.
And I think also being female and being young,
Yep.
um, where it's like, oh, well, it can't be that because you're young. It can't be that, or you're just sensitive. You're just overly, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had a very serious spine injury, spine surgery, about 4 years ago, where they took out, two discs and a vertebrae. So I have like 25 grand worth of titanium steel right about here.
Oh wow.
So
Yikes.
yeah. But that was when I was like 28, 29. And the doctors would look at the chart and then come in and like see me, and they'd be like, how do you have this much damage? How
Right.
do you have this much degeneration at your age?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't know, you're the doctor, you tell me.
Right.
Like, but I think the invisible part of it, it's tough, right? So for a long time, I suffered with the pain, but people would not see that anything was wrong with me. There was no
Mm-hmm.
sort of marker of it, and even I couldn't put a name on it. So I never asked for any sort of accommodations. I never asked for assistance or help or anything where it would have made things a little easier on me. And that led to more injuries, more dislocations, more sprains. And it really got to the point where I had to understand, hey, there are things that I have to do to take care of myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not going to apologize for that.
Right.
One of which being that my watch just beeped at me,
Mm-hmm.
that I haven't stood up in a while.
Oh, well,
If I
please
don't
take a
stand
moment to
up,
stand. Yes.
oh yes, um, my joints and things can get like locked up.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff can just, I need to stretch and like take care of myself. And my one thing is I'm not good, like I can't stand for long periods in one spot. Like
Right.
things start to ache and creak and whatever. And but for a long time, it was like, well, that's just my problem, that's just something I have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
um and it was really a journey to realize, hey, you have a medical condition. Like this is something they're telling me I was born with.
Mm-hmm.
Just didn't have a name for it. um and that means that there are certain things that you might need help with at certain times. I think it's
Right.
also hard because there are certain days where I'm good, I can walk around, I'm generally speaking okay.
Mm-hmm.
It can change like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there are days where, so I have a cane that I use
Mm-hmm.
fairly often. Do I need it every day? No, but it has been easier to just use it every day because it makes people then have a visual cue.
Right.
Oh, something's up, I might need to give her some more space, or I don't get harassed when I have
Mm-hmm.
the cane if
Yeah.
people see me using my disability placard, right?
Right.
If I use the parking thing, the disability placard, and then I just get out of the car and, oh, well, she doesn't have a cane, she doesn't have a wheelchair, I'm
Right.
the disability police, like I'm gonna, so people just make a lot of assumptions. And so I have a cane that I'll use. It's helpful, it helps, safety, right? A fall for me could be really bad.
Mm-hmm.
um a simple trip, anything, I can, and have hurt myself really badly on several occasions.
Yeah.
So the cane is helpful for me, but it also makes it visible.
Mm-hmm.
It does.
Right.
And I see people treat me differently if I have it or I don't.
Right.
um and sometimes people can be really strange or ask
Yeah.
questions, or you can see they want to ask a question but then they
Mm-hmm.
don't really know how to ask it. And then even the difference, if I know I'm going to be out walking a lot, or I've participated in some marches, for various causes that are near and dear to my heart. I have a walker that I'll use because it's more support. It's even on each side,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's like a seat if I need to sit down because I can't stand for long periods. It's great. I
Right.
carry my own seat around. It works. But people see that as like, oh, she's really disabled or something's really
Yeah.
wrong with her. Like, just people treat you different.
Yeah. Exactly.
it's so the difference, yeah, there's a huge difference.
And
There's a
that's
difference
that.
between when people can't see anything, when there's been times when I've had different surgeries that like something is wrapped up and people feel like, oh, she's just injured.
Yeah.
Like there's such a difference between like what people think is like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you versus like, oh, you have a temporary injury versus, oh, you have a disability. And like
Right.
people
It's like,
stuck on you when it's like, you don't even know me.
yeah, there's all these extremes that are you're sort of being like forced
I don't know if that
into.
answers your question at all.
Well, no, but it does. And well, no, but there's sort of like I'm glad that you bring this up because I think like the real question that I like am sort of like, I guess there's a few different questions, is one, like how do regular folks like, and I mean I think the I this question is somewhat rhetorical. I mean, I'd love to hear you weigh on the answer, but I think like my answer to this is like, be more empathetic, and remember that when you're just anybody that you're walking up to, that you don't know what's going on with them, that there could be like they could well be in excruciating pain, and they're not even going to say a word to you. They're not going to let you know anything because they're concerned about you getting worried about them in that moment, or questioning their pain on the other side of it, right? So there's all this stuff. Then there's the that moment of somebody who experiences that disability has to make that decision. Okay, do I walk out of the house today without my cane or without my walker or whatever, and risk people just treating me like I'm fine and like I can just do everything that they think that they can do, and just putting expectations on me that like, and potentially being insensitive in ways that like I just don't want to expose myself to? Or do I instead want to bring this aid which helps me, which visualizes a little bit, but then ultimately could lead to people interacting with me fundamentally differently because they see me as somebody with a disability? So first off, there's this idea of everybody who has a disability is still a human being, period. Like, and you shouldn't have any different type, like there should be no difference between the way that you talk to somebody with a disability versus somebody without a disability, the same way there shouldn't be any difference between the way you talk to a man and a woman, or like
Yeah.
anybody of a different like ethnicity. Like there's just there's no reason to do that.
Well, I mean, it's really where ableism comes in, and I think we all have that. I mean, I know that sometimes what we expect to be the default. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's not the same, but there's a parallel to how we see whiteness as the default, and then
Mm-hmm.
everything else is other. You know,
Yep.
like
And
we see like able-bodied or whatever you want to call it as the default, and then everyone else is
mm-hmm.
other than that. Like even just the fact that they call it accommodations. Like
Yeah.
so like just for example, like I've had a couple surgeries on my hands for some of the joints and ligaments and stuff. So I can't, even though I miss it terribly, I can't write by hand for more than a couple minutes
Mm-hmm.
before I'm in like excruciating pain. I just
Right.
can't do it, unfortunately. So I remember when I went to grad school the first time, um, having to like apply for accommodations so I could have a computer in class to take notes,
Mm-hmm.
and like having to prove to them that I couldn't like, that it
Right.
was just this whole like, oh, okay, well you have this, and well you've got to jump through this nine. Like, why can't we just like have things accessible for people so that they can use what they need? Like
Right.
it's
And
it's a different framework. It's a different framework. And I mean, I will 100% put myself out there that I still have a lot of work to do. There if anyone is really interested in disability advocacy and the intersectionality of different marginalized identities, I participated like all summer long. There's a movie called Crip Camp. I believe it's
yes,
still
it's an
on Netflix.
amazing film. If
Amazing,
anybody
amazing.
who's watching this channel who hasn't watched it, please go watch that film. It's
Yeah,
so important, so important.
amazing. And what they did from that is they had like a virtual online Crip Camp. So like
Yeah.
every Sunday there was like a webinar, and they would have different people with all different kinds of disabilities, but they really went like the extra 9 miles to try to accommodate as many different types of people as
Mm-hmm.
possible, with ASL, with closed captioning, with image descriptions, with you know, alternative text, you know, to try to reach people with intellectual disabilities. I mean, they really
Mm-hmm.
tried to. And was it perfect? No. Were there times when things went wrong, or different needs clashed? You know, they quickly found out that one of the things they had done to try to help to provide text for people who were deaf was clashing with the screen readers of people who were blind. And so it was like having to
Yeah.
see, you know, how to accommodate the many different needs. But it was such a different atmosphere. It was like
Mm-hmm.
there was nothing wrong with, you know, everything. If someone wasn't getting it or they needed something, they would stop and
Right.
adjust and retry. And it wasn't about we have to be perfect, but it's
Mm-hmm.
this is an environment where we want to be as accessible as absolutely possible. And then I reflected on how different that is from most things that we interact with in
Yeah.
life. You know, the fact that in New Hampshire, that, you know, our legislative sessions and public hearings do not have captioning or ASL
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely ridiculous. As a
Right.
bare minimum, right? You know, there are a lot of things that we should be doing to be accessible, and to not have it like, oh well, we have to do this extra stuff for, again, those people,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, no, there are things that people need. We want to be this inclusive. Inclusivity is not a bad thing.
Right. Yeah.
Like, how many voices and how many perspectives are getting left out and left behind because we're not allowing them entry?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, and you know, here's something like here's a thought. Like, okay, in the context of say Ehlers-Danlos, for example, which is I do know a bit about Ehlers-Danlos. So in that instance, right, like a lot of people with Ehlers-Danlos will have a hard time like lifting things that are more than 30 pounds, right? Like that's a good example of something that's
Mhm.
like that could throw your shoulder out if you've got EDS.
Yes.
Um, and so when you to sort of link this back around, when you tie um, health insurance to a to an employer, right? You're creating basically like in that environment, you're creating a few different outcomes, right? Like if you're somebody who has EDS and you're alone, you now and let's say you're like fresh out of high school too, right? Like let's say you don't have like a whole lot of experience, you don't have a degree, you don't have any kind of like, and you don't have a way to get that, right?
Like,
You're
how are you going to do a retail
right.
type
So the
job? Or
first thing that they
yeah.
send you into is a job. So in order to get your health insurance, you literally have to further damage your physical your like you have to worsen your condition in order to get help with your condition, right? um which then is psychologically alienating, right? In a different instance, right? If you say like are you say you have a partner and you're on their insurance, right? All of a sudden you're now relying on somebody else to get that insurance, like that can cause stress in your own personal relationship, or you have to find some sort of alternative process through the state which requires you to fill out a whole bunch of hoops and explain to the state why it is you can't work. And in our society, to have to go through that process and explain why it is you need help is incredibly degrading and
Absolutely.
further disenfranchises this person from feeling like they can be a meaningful contributor to society. So there are so many different ways in which the the way in which we choose to provide health care directly alienates people who suffer from what would be considered invisible conditions, right? From not just the workforce, but society as a whole. Because the moment you tie, like, that means that, like, oh, well, I have to get health insurance, right? Like, I can't separate how I make my money from how I get my health insurance. They have to be one and the same thing. So now all of a sudden I have to work for health insurance rather than like, maybe I have a good idea for work, but I might like, you know, like I have this or that, like, you know, I can stay with this or that family member for a little while. Like, you know, like you can make some things work, but like you need to like you can scrape by and save. You know, I know a lot of people that have had like, you know, doing couch surfing for a little bit or something like that while they're working to save up money. But like to throw health insurance in there as another complication is really tough. And then, you know, it's just this is a very compounding problem that alienates actual meaningful groups of people from our society. And that's why if you know somebody who suffers from any condition that's remotely like this, or within this family, or you know somebody who's had to deal with like um even mental or psychological health problems, like that still can be, I do not want to create any kind of equivalency between the two, because a physical condition is very debilitating. Like you can't lift 30 pounds, you can't lift 30 pounds. That's not the same thing as saying like I feel so depressed that I cannot get out of bed today. Those are two very different issues, right? Like the idea though is that regardless, both of those like conditions do not present visibly to the rest of the world. And something that I constantly feel like if leftists want to be out here talking about like intersectionality, to not incorporate this problem into your intersectional argument is really denying the reality of what intersectional politics actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so an organization that I have become more familiar with and have worked with is Able New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
They do a lot with different disabilities, and I was very disheartened, you know, when I talked more to their executive board and some of their members. You know, they said that sometimes they had more problems trying to get progressive legislators to understand what they were asking for. You know, that the people that they felt would naturally be on their side, that there was just such a blind spot,
Mm-hmm.
or you know, oh yeah, of course, yeah, we do that, but you don't, you know,
Right.
like just not even recognizing the gap existing between, you know, how things are made available and what is possible versus, you know, what if you're really trying, you know, that you know, that overarching, like trying to change these systems so that they work for everyone, that you're,
Mm-hmm.
the criteria is, are you a human? Yes, wonderful, welcome, you know,
Right.
that you have to look at these different, you know, disability organizations and flipping the script, that it's not like these are those other people over there. No, these are people. That's
Right.
it.
Yeah, they're
Like,
just people. That's yeah, it doesn't matter.
and I would definitely, you know, someone who would be great to explore this like even deeper with,
Mm-hmm.
Marcella Termini.
Mm-hmm.
She ran for state rep in Manchester.
She was
Unfortunately,
on
lost.
as previously at one point, and I'd
Yeah,
love to have her back to talk about it more, because this is an issue that I want to keep discussing.
she has a lot, you know, with her experiences with her children who experience disability and different experiences that she's had. She talks a lot about the concept of like universal design,
Mm-hmm.
like from even when we start of like how we're going to approach something. It's not like, oh, here's a building and then okay, then we put the ramp on for those people who might need to get in. It's like starting from
Right.
square one. How can we make this, whatever it is that you're building, or, you know, whether it's literal or figurative,
Yeah.
like a program or, you know, access entry, like how do we make this so that any human
Can use it.
can use it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a different way. It's not having people with different disabilities being an afterthought. It's fascinating and something that um, I'm sure she would love to talk more about.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I forgot she was on the show before. It's jogging my
no,
memory,
it's
but
okay. I mean, if anything, it makes me think that maybe this is something that we should develop some sort of like the maybe this is a panel discussion topic. Like this is
okay.
something that we revisit and continue to discuss as things move forward. I mean, this particular type of issue is one that's like again, it's personal to me. And I also see it as being a huge blind spot, as you've pointed out on the left. Like, it's that oh yeah, we're totally for it, but it's like, yeah, but you didn't think about it at all. You didn't stop and take the time to have the conversation. And it's
Right.
like, and you can't just assume that you're throwing it all on the bandwagon if you didn't think about it. Like, how do you know that you got all the bags when you don't even know what the bags looked like? You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of like the metaphor I would use. You had no idea what bags you needed to put on there, so how do you know that you got them all
Right,
on the
right.
cart?
And to be clear, it's like I don't have all of the answers either.
Hmm.
And my experience as someone with a disability is only my experience.
Right,
Um,
right, exactly.
I think that there needs to be a varied, there's a lot of different experiences, and a lot of
Hmm.
people, what they would say is needed or not needed, or the focus. I think in the disability community, something that really came out from the Crip Camp movie, is that it's been sort of there had in that moment, what the movie talks about is when, like, people of different disabilities all coming together, like we have
Hmm.
we have this common thread that unites us, and it shouldn't be, you know deaf people against blind people against people with mobility issues, against, like everything was like, let's all just compete for our little piece of the pie. It's like, no, coming together and being like, we're all part of this community, and
Hmm.
that we're not going to be satisfied until everybody's needs are met,
Right.
and that's a way more powerful negotiation tactic,
Hmm.
and that everybody, different people's strengths complement someone else's weaknesses, and that's a very much more successful way to go about this. Unfortunately, I have seen, and there's debate about, how rare Ehlers-Danlos really is. Is it really
Hmm.
rare? Is it just underdiagnosed?
Right.
There's a lot of stuff out there, but sometimes, in the rare disease community, it can become like, oh no, I want funding for this one particular thing, or I
Right.
want funding for this one, and everything competing, when it's like, no, we need to be like pooling our resources together here, and to be
Yeah.
saying, like, I don't care how many people this disease affects, it affects people, and that's why it's important to get, I've learned more about things like orphan drug research,
Hmm.
and how to, like, incentivize companies to come up with new therapies and treatments, for more rare conditions, and that it has to come from, again, that collectivist sort of orientation, and it can't be a you versus me, because then neither of us are getting anything.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I couldn't agree more. So we
I don't think this is like what you were
no,
envisioning,
but
all of this to come out at all.
I
So,
know, I'm glad though. That's the thing, is that every conversation is a rabbit hole, right?
oh,
So
absolutely.
um okay, I there is one last thing that I want to touch on with you here. Not to shift gears, because I think, like, we could talk about that topic, like I could keep going for another 2-3 hours on this. But there is, and we'll have time. We'll totally have time to do more
It's all good.
discussions on it as well. Like, I want to do more think tank type stuff, where we, like, really come up with ideas and stuff to shop around, like, how do we solve some of the awareness issues that people have with this, and how do we sort of, like, internally on the left work on this particular issue. Like, I think it's a neat little project to pick up and try and shift the team to understand it a little better. So
Mhm.
because I think we can fight a lot better on that issue. I think that's going to give us some serious teeth in that fight. Um, Separate avenue here.
Okay.
Okay, we're we're gonna do it. All right. So, something that I personally noticed about your campaign site is that you have a dedicated section to Second Amendment, which is,
Yep.
like, not something that you see a lot of leftists do,
Mhm.
and especially progressive politicians. And so, okay, this I really I I think it's super important that you did this, and I think this is a great way to open up this conversation. Um, you're a strong supporter of background checks and red flag laws, and is, specifically as a measure to counteract high suicide rates, which is like the primary. So like we don't really have a high murder rate in New Hampshire. When someone gets murdered, it's a pretty big deal. But
Yeah, I
we
think the latest study I saw from Everytown Gun Safety was that like 90% of deaths by gun are suicides in New Hampshire.
so that's just, I mean, that's a percentage that is inarguable when it comes to the issue. So that's like with that kind of a statistic, this the conversation about gun control in New Hampshire is a suicide discussion. And those positions, right? The idea of like background checks, red flag laws, that is like a real conundrum for some reason
For
for
some people,
for
yeah. I mean,
people.
they see it as either you agree that, people have a right to own a firearm,
Mm-hmm.
or you want to take everybody's firearms. And like, I don't see it as this either or.
Right.
You know, my stepfather still does, owns firearms. I believe in that there is a such thing as a responsible gun owner.
Mm-hmm.
I see it, but I don't see it to the extent as like, oh, you have a heartbeat, you're alive, here's a pistol. Like,
Right.
I feel like it is something you should have to, take safety classes or in some way demonstrate that you have respect for that weapon, that
Mm-hmm.
you know what that weapon can do, that you know how to operate it safely.
Mm-hmm.
And I support background checks, closing the gun show loophole.
Mm-hmm.
I support background checks even in person to person, individual sales, because there are reasons that would disqualify someone from gun ownership, and that's a whole other conversation. Some of those, there's a list federally of
Mm-hmm.
what makes you ineligible. But I I know that I might be separate from some of my progressive peers on this, because I
Mm-hmm.
know there are some people who are at the point where it's like, all right, no, like
There's no more.
too many people dying, too much, and my partner is from London,
Mm-hmm.
and in the UK, you can't get the kind of firearms that you can get here.
Right.
Um, they had a horrible school shooting in Scotland. Many children died, and they said, you know what? Nope. Like,
Like no
we
more.
don't want this to ever be a possibility ever again.
Mm-hmm.
And people literally gave over their guns. That's not going to happen in this country. It's just not.
Right.
I and there's a lot to that. And again, I don't want it to be like, I'm always saying this, but I have a paper on this too.
I,
It's about 10 pages. And it goes into the history, and why the US has, what gun culture really is, and that
mm-hmm.
it's not just a possession, that people really
Right.
see it as part of their heritage, part of their it's not just like, oh, it's a hobby, I do it sometimes. It's part of who they are. It's an
Mm-hmm.
extension of themselves, right? And the
Yeah.
psychology behind that. And so when you say something like, oh, well, I agree with extreme risk protection orders, that
Mm-hmm.
there should be a legal mechanism where in the event of imminent serious harm to self or others, that firearms can be temporarily removed.
Right.
If someone sees their firearm as an extension of themselves, that is going to trigger a very scared response. That's going
Yeah.
to trigger, how could you even? And they don't hear all of the qualifiers. They don't hear, even when we call it a red flag law. I know why people do that, and I get that, but I will always call it an extreme risk protection order, because it highlights the extreme. Like,
Yeah.
we are not just talking like, oh, you got into a fight with your neighbor, so you can go down and say like, so and so, blah blah blah. No, like, the burden of proof is there.
Yeah.
But I unfortunately in my personal life and my professional life have seen the absolute devastation that suicide by firearm can cause.
Right.
And I think we also need to really have a deeper conversation about suicidal ideation,
Mm-hmm.
suicidal acts, where that comes from, some of people's experience. There are some very brave people out there who do talk about, either people who have survived a suicide attempt or, talked about that experience. I think we need to normalize that more, where
Mm-hmm.
people can understand that framework, and the fact that it can be a very, not for everyone, but it can be very impulsive. It's just like
Yeah.
that final thing on top where you're like, I can't. The
Yeah.
pain is too much. This is too much. I just have to, I'm in that zone right now. And
Yeah.
when someone has a gun readily available, it is a very it's very often very likely fatal. Um,
Well, it's very easy to just push a button,
right.
and
It's too, and
and it's
that
also
is
in our society right now. It's also really easy to want to seek quick relief to a problem. Like when I think about like that, you just said something that I think is so important that people understand about suicidal ideation is that it is very whimsical in nature. The way that that thought will cross through your mind is very like, I'm just gonna do it. I like this. I give up. Like it's very much so like I just want to quit the game right now. Like it's not like a lot of suicidal ideation for people is not as emotional as people make it out to be. That
It's
in
just a
yeah,
decision.
for a
It's
lot of
Yeah.
people it's actually done in a like in their mind. It's a very clinical decision. It's a very like calculated decision that they're making based off of like what they understand their like stress threshold to be. Like,
Right, that sense of I cannot take that. Yeah, I mean, there are some people who can be chronically suicidal,
mm-hmm,
and I mean, there's a range of experiences,
right,
but in people who in completed suicides, a lot of the times it is there is a decision that can be made where it's, well, that's it, I want out of this.
right.
When I counsel people, it's not common, it's not as common as maybe people think, where someone comes and is like, well, yes, I've made this decision and this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to tell you my plan.
Mm-hmm.
Typically when someone's at that point and then they have access to that lethal means,
They don't
that's
stop to
that's the
take the time.
danger area.
Yeah.
They're not picking up the phone to call someone at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to catch people when they're more in that, like, oh yeah, well, sometimes I might think about it, or it might cross my mind, and then it's
Right.
like, well, have you thought, like, we need to talk about it more,
Mm-hmm.
is it, and what exactly is the thought? Is it,
Right.
I just wish I could hide for a bit, or I
Mm-hmm.
just wish I could just not be here for a little bit, or
Mm-hmm.
just go into a hole somewhere, or not feel, or get at, like, what is it really that you're looking to either end or
Right.
escape from, or whatever it is. And let's look at that, let's parse that out, because what happens when someone's in that frame, their sense of time is completely warped, their
Mm-hmm.
sense of what is forever, and
Mm-hmm.
believing in this shortened future, that there's nothing further, there's nothing more for them, that they're done with this life, or there's no progression, there's nothing to look forward to, everything's always going to be bad forever, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
um it's, but people have to feel comfortable enough to say that that's where they're at.
Right.
And so that can be a fine line too, of wanting to provide support, and allowing people to discuss, like, if that's where they're at, like, let's talk about it. How do we, um with safety planning, a lot of the training that I have, um a big piece of that is like reducing access to any lethal means,
Mm-hmm.
asking questions if people have firearms in the home, if they have, lethal doses of medication, not whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it might be, or something, and trying to remove the person from that. And in most cases that can be done without hospitalization. There
Right.
are, every case is different. But that's why I come down with extreme risk protection orders. Some people see it as a property rights issue. I
Yeah.
don't. I feel that, with the burden of proof, there is due process. There's a lot of like myths about it too.
Yeah.
Like it's not easy to just, you know,
Yeah, they
have
can't
that.
just
But
snap their fingers and take your stuff away. Like you got to
right.
go
It's
through a lot of
not
hoops.
how
Like,
it
yeah.
works. And I'm not saying it's perfect either, but
Right.
to have a mechanism where a concerned immediate family member, you know, a professional, someone could at least like, let's look into this. And how
Hmm.
do we keep this person safe? That the way that they're thinking, that they could very easily go into the, I just want out.
Exactly.
Um, you know, and I've also, you know, I've counseled many people who have made an attempt and survived,
Hmm.
um, who, you know, as soon as they swallowed that bottle of pills, or as soon as they, you know, did whatever it was, were like, oh my goodness, what did I just do?
Right.
You know, not that that's everyone's experience, but there is this sense of um,
Of oh damn.
yeah, like this is final. And that
Yeah.
when they decided it, it's like it's irrational thinking in a way, because
Hmm.
their thought process stops at the pain is going to stop, or this
Hmm.
situation is going to stop, or I'm
Right.
not going to be here. But it doesn't progress to, yeah, you're never going to be, like, you're not here, like there is no you, like there is no future, you don't exist, you're obliterating yourself.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
but it doesn't progress that far. It just stops in the, it's going to take my pain away or escape or whatever it is, how someone's feeling.
Right.
um, you know, so that's why I feel really passionately, you know, that I agree with the legislation, and that there's a mechanism. I believe that there should be a high burden of proof, and then, you know, even the way that it was introduced in New Hampshire, there are very strict penalties for any false statements or anyone,
Hmm.
you know, that would even try to abuse the law in that sense, to make claims that weren't true about someone, you know, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I mean, I do think it's a balance where it's saying, it's not we want to take your guns. That's not it at all.
Yeah.
But it's saying that there are ways that we have identified people who are at high risk for hurting themselves or hurting someone else. We do this for people, you know, certain convictions of domestic violence. We do this when people have orders of protection orders.
Hmm.
You know, so it's not like this is a new concept
Right.
of separating someone temporarily from their firearms. That's not a new legal concept.
Hmm.
It's allowing concerned family members or professionals, you know, close people, a mechanism to say, essentially, this person needs a timeout.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
um, and again, not that I take that lightly, but I see. I'm not saying, you know, nobody should have guns ever, and you know, if again, the one thing that gets really gets on my gets my goat, or whatever, you know, grinds
Yeah.
my
Yeah. Of
gears. There we
course.
go.
Yeah.
That's what I
There
was
you go.
you know, is when people are talking about like, well, you don't want women to be able to protect themselves. You know, you don't want people to be able to protect themselves. And I'm like, that's not it at all. Like
I.
if a and maybe, you know, and I'll be completely honest, maybe it's because, you know, I grew up in New York, and then I lived in Mass, and then I moved up here. New York and Mass have very structured gun laws.
Yeah.
And it just is the way it is. You know,
Yeah.
you take classes, you have to prove, you know, that you know what you're doing with a serious weapon.
I mean, it's like you said, moving up here, it's like going back in time. Like you're just going back to some
A little
super,
bit,
super
yeah. I mean, and
antiquated
I think
stuff.
in New Hampshire, you know, I believe that a lot of the issues that come up, you know, so my campaign, I did get the candidate distinction from Moms Demand Action, which is a
Yes.
anti-gun violence group. But I had a very long conversation. You know, you submit the questionnaire, and like um, most people just get it.
Yeah.
You know, but I had a very long conversation with one of their people, because a couple of my answers, you know, they wanted to flesh it out a little bit and see where I was going on that. Like I
Yeah. Sure.
wasn't just a straight like, you know, guns are horrible, because that's not what I think.
Right.
You know, but I explained to her, I feel like if you have a permitting process, where someone, just like, we have a license to drive.
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
where, and again, not to say that there are, everyone's a perfect driver,
Right.
but a process to prove how to operate what you're using. Then I feel, certain things, like there was a question about allowing firearms on college campuses.
Yeah.
And I said, well, if there's a way, if someone has a permit for their firearm and they have gone through this, I feel like they should be able to keep it on them. But in this day and age where anyone can just walk into a store and walk out, like,
Yeah, it just yeah,
no.
there's yeah, it's like it's one of those things you can sit here and you can think about all of this legislative stuff, but at the same time, if you're not going to think about the actual like practice of walking into a place, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
And furthermore, it's like if you are actually running for office, take the time to sit down. If you get those questionnaires, use that as an opportunity to ask yourself if you actually know the issue that they're asking you about deeply, or if you're just like trying to get another endorsement. I'm not saying anybody did that, and I'm certainly not saying you do that or anyone, but like my point being that, like, to your point of like, oh yeah, I'm against gun laws. Okay, here you go. Like, here's the endorsement. And it's like, okay, but like, I'm glad that we all agree that this is a problem, and I'm glad that we all agree that like the way they do things in Australia or the UK are a whole lot wiser than the way they do it here. Like, I get that. Like, cool. Like, 100% co-sign that. But I think you bring up an excellent point here where we're never going to be the UK or Australia. It's just not going to happen. Like, if that was going to happen, I I I cannot even like, and this is part of the problem, is that I can't even remember all of the names of the incidents that would point to why this needs to happen. And the fact that there's been so many to a point where I can't even list them all off in my head is direct evidence of the fact that it will never change in this country. Like, we've just it's right there. It's right out in front of us. The fact that, like, how long ago was Sandy Hook? You know what I mean? Like, how many happened between then and now?
Right.
Mosque shootings? Like, I don't need to get into this. Like, it's
We're kind of numb to it in a way. I mean,
right.
there's a Onion article, like, or just like the headline, that's like, oh, we can't believe this happened, says only nation where this happens. Like,
Right.
you know, like that, oh, it's again, and they just put it up every time because it's, so and I think it's also another example where we have to be careful about the language that we use. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it used to be like gun control. It's like, no, I'm not talking about gun control. I'm talking about gun violence prevention,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like, and there are things that we can do legislatively to make things safer. I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
it's a perfect world either, but it's also, though, I think that the argument gets oversimplified when it goes, well, they just want to take your guns. They just want to take your guns away.
Right.
They don't know what guns are. They don't know anything. They don't know what type, the difference between this, a rifle and a pistol they don't know what different ammunition, they don't know it. And so it scares them. So they want it all to go away. So we need to hold on to it and protect it as hard and tight as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I filled out the NRA. So when you run for office,
Mm-hmm.
your address gets published publicly,
Mm-hmm.
and you get a ton of mail,
Yeah, I'm
ton of
sure.
mail from all sorts of organizations that you've never heard of before,
Right.
and some that you have. And so the NRA did contact me. They have a particular wing for state legislators.
Mm-hmm.
And as a first time person running for a state rep, I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll fill these all out. But I was very like specific and like laid out exactly how I feel about the bunch of different issues. There was like
Mm-hmm.
a front and back. It was long. Um, and I was actually, I don't, disappointed isn't the right word, but just kind of frustrated that, like, I took the time to fill out that questionnaire and like explain, certain things that I'm in agreement with, certain things I'm not in agreement with, that I do very much understand, people who hunt and all this and
Mm-hmm.
blah, 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 blah. And like, I still got an F from the NRA when I know my dear friend Sherry,
Yeah.
um, probably just wrote like F you and sent it in and got an F.
Got
Like,
enough,
you know
yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
No, I know what you're saying.
and that's where she's at. And I love her and you're great. And I know you're probably watching this. You're awesome. But do you see what I'm saying? Like I took
No,
the
I
time
see
to
exactly what
like
you
give
mean.
a very measured, like sort of compromise isn't the right word, but to explain like there are certain measures I think that we can take, certain things where that is going too far, and how do we balance this? And like I got an F anyway. I was like, oh, all right, well,
Well, like to me it's like okay, so like I always kind of frame it within the straw man metaphor.
mm,
And it's like you we are at a point in our society now where misinformation and disinformation are so prevalent
yeah,
that we can no longer afford to not take the time to literally burn every single straw man to the ground, whether we know it's a straw man or not, right?
yeah,
So, like, the point being, like, yeah, of course, the NRA doing their marketing the way it is right now can be straw man, like, is a straw man that can be burned simply off of the way they behaved in the 1970s. Like, like the 1970s NRA would be all over getting this legislation through. Like that's just there was a time where the culture of that organization shifted. And like I think it does actually directly correlate to Wayne LaPierre and like when he got involved in it. I think that's I might be wrong about my timing on that, but I think he was like a huge part of that. Anyways, um you have to like what you did is you exposed in that moment the inherent partisanship and lack of like attention to detail that the NRA takes on it. Like that is a material way in which you're exposing the bias of that organization itself, right? Not that we didn't already know, but again, it's like it's one
yeah.
thing
Like
to say
they
the
had the
NRA is full of
option to
shit.
give me like a C, like
Exactly, or even a D plus. I mean, come on now, really. Like, it's like, and I think that's the thing is, it's like,
the either or is what hurts us.
right, and it's like, and we have to remember that saying they just want to take my guns is the right version of us saying all guns are bad.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
like
in a way, yeah.
okay, like if we want to yeah, we can make an argument from that total place, like just the same way they're going to take my guns away is clearly a winning argument for conservatives. Like clearly it's a winning argument for them. We can do that. We can totally just take that hardline position and never like explore it further. Or like, and again, this is not an argument for fence sitting. This is an argument for accepting multiple political realities that I can accept. These people are worried that we're just going to take their guns away, but we believe that guns are bad. We can hold both of those truths and work with those two things together, right? And like the middle ground for us Americans is to have like protection laws, like
Yeah.
firearm protection laws. Like that's the middle ground, at least for right now. Because once you do that, like if we were to theoretically, if we were able to reintroduce the same kind of gun culture that existed in like the NRA days, right? We might be in a much better position now to make an argument for let's abolish automatic weapons, right? Like that becomes a much easier case to make if the actual culture from once it comes accepts the safety premises of the like of what would be the opposition, like, and which are I would say are reasonable. You know what I mean? It's not off base. So that's my little tangent there.
No, I gotcha. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
y-
and I felt it was important to put, how I feel on the website because I know in Litchfield there are a lot of gun owners. There are a lot of people that's their, I would say taxes and Second Amendment
mm-hmm,
are probably the things that come up the most often. And
mm-hmm.
then, healthcare, education, stuff like that. But a lot of people, they want to know, what are you going to do to their wallet and what are you going to do to their guns?
Right.
Um, and, so I wanted to, in terms of like trying to run a progressive campaign in an area that's not known as very progressive, is my website is 100% truthful. It's where I stand. But I think there's also a way to frame things and to talk about things and to help people along on that journey of
Yep.
like, if you're only exposed to one thing and things being one way, it can be very jarring for someone to come along and say, nope, we're going to flip that around. Like that
Right.
can be very scary and be very disorienting. And the protection mechanism, the survival mechanism goes, nope, nope. Like even if it might be better for them or the people that they care about, the wall goes up, the guard goes up. And so my hope is that my candidacy and how I talk about the issues and reaching out to people can start some conversations, can start some journeys. um, some people might want to call me an idealist on that point, but I don't care. I have done and will continue to do the constituent outreach and talking to people and letting people know I'm a human being. I'm not some like career politician that's super polished and, has a way to pivot back on every single point and will dance around topics before and not answer questions.
Right.
I'm going to tell you kind of how I think. I'm going to tell you if I don't know about something, because it's another thing, especially at the state rep level, you can't be an expert on every single issue,
Right.
but you should have some connections or know how to get to someone who does know about it. And that's a huge thing with what I would love to do as a state rep for Litchfield, is to actually be a voice for the people of the town. I don't feel like there is that conduit of information or concern or communication from the town to the state house.
Yeah.
Moving here several years ago, I tried multiple times to get in touch with the reps. And, when I learned more about New Hampshire's system and how many reps there are, which
It's
is
like,
humongous,
yeah.
um,
It's a mess.
humongous.
They're like the
Right? Pros
largest,
and cons.
second largest in the world or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I was like, oh, that's wonderful. Like the reps, they work out, they work out of their homes, like they're really in the community. And I got no response. I don't know why. I feel like if you are in that position, especially, something where it says representative in the title, even if you disagree with me, that's fine, but let's have the conversation or
Right.
acknowledge the correspondence. You know, I sent a letter to Chris Sununu when he vetoed the death penalty overturned, but before the legislature had overridden the veto.
Right.
So I wrote to him basically expressing, my thoughts about his veto, and he wrote back, at least, you acknowledge it, right? Like
Yeah.
you don't have to agree,
Right.
but you acknowledge it and you have the conversation. And that's really what I'm out to do. As a social worker, my whole career has been connecting to people, finding what motivates them, finding where they are versus where they want to be and how I can be part of that journey to get there.
Right.
And I have had to connect with anyone that sits in that chair opposite me. I don't know exactly how I do it, but I do.
You just gotta
I
go
mean, I
for it.
just do. I haven't been fired yet. So, it's not about, well, I thought it was important on the campaign website to have some of my policy positions, give people a flavor. That's not all it's about either. Some of it is about, how is this person approachable? Are they relatable? Do they have, an actual, they want to serve the public, or are they doing this for themselves? And it's not.
Right.
And for those of you out there that don't know, the state rep position is essentially volunteer. I mean, you're signing up for a heck of a lot of criticism and not a lot of reward.
Yep.
But I think it takes someone a little unique like me, to fill that kind of position and be able to hit those marks and be able to use my advocacy and all the different skills that I've developed over the years. And
Yep. Absolutely. I'm glad you're running. For all of these exact reasons. I think I after After our conversation today, I feel really confident that like you're the exact type of person that we need to see. I mean, I'd said it at the top of the episode, but I only come away from this discussion feeling more so that way. So I mean, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. This was just
I
like
appreciate you taking the time and inviting me on, and
pish
um,
posh. Let's do it more. You know, like I think every guest that I've had on, I want to have back on. You know, and so it's like, and there's this part of me that's like, oh, it's gonna be great when the primary the election's over and we can actually like really do it. You know. You know, even though, but then of course 2022 is going to roll around and it's all going to be back up again. So it's, you know,
yeah, this every 2 year cycle. Whew,
yeah, I know. I tell
that's
you,
a
yeah,
lot.
that's we've and for any
Whew.
of our viewers who are hearing us complain about this right now, I would highly recommend the interview that I did with Ivy Van a month or two ago, because in that interview we talk a lot about the problem with the 2 year the 2 year cycle and how it's like you really can't do anything. So and that
The
came up
first
with
year,
Sherry
you're
too.
like, what the heck is going on? The second year, you're worried about getting reelected. Like,
Right.
when do you actually, you know?
Yeah, when do you get to do the work, right? So yeah, and that's and I think and that is definitely an issue that I want to continue to talk about with everybody as time goes on. But again, Nikki, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very
Awesome.
much.
Cheers. All right, cool. We will I will catch up with you soon.
Nikki4nh.com.
Yes, yes, everybody, and I'll put that in the description for the video. So awesome. Thanks a bunch,
Mm,
Nikki.
thank you.
All right, everybody. So that was Nikki Fordey. I am just so pleased to have had her on. That was a great episode. Um, this is there's so much important information in there, guys. So much important information. Holy cow! Like I have been wanting to have a comprehensive conversation with somebody on disability stuff for a little while now, and that was like I really please if like there are so many important parts of this episode, but I really cannot emphasize enough how important it is that people watch that section. So I will get back in and I will timestamp everything. There is an upcoming episode of Deep Dive with Jonah. I know I've been teasing it for like weeks now, but we actually have it on. We are going to be talking about we have a critical response to The Social Dilemma, which is out on Netflix right now. So for anybody, you know, take the time to watch it. But Jonah and I have some responses to it from a more philosophical context and some sort of wider critiques of the way that the information is presented in the documentary. So not the information itself, but at any rate, I will not digress too much. I will wish you all a swell weekend. Take care. I hope you're all well and safe and healthy in the midst of this absurd pandemic, and I know that we will all get through it. So cheers everybody, take care, and I will catch you soon.